ESS Biodiversity Conservation Part 8 examines the roles of various groups in conservation efforts and the different approaches towards conservation. The essential ideas are the impact of losing biodiversity drives conservation efforts. The variety of arguments given for the conservation of biodiversity will depend on environmental values systems. There are various approaches to the conservation of biodiversity, each with associated strengths and limitations. Here is the outline for the biodiversity conservation movies. Use this slide to find the movie you need for review purposes. This movie is focused here. Here is the IB syllabus statement that will drive this movie forward. Compare and contrast the role and activities of international, governmental, and non-governmental organizations in conserving and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity. Consider the use of media, speed of response, diplomatic constraints, financial resources, and political influence. Let's start with non-governmental organizations, aka NGOs, such as Greenpeace, WWF, Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, and others. Each of these groups has a mission statement, and I will present some of those mission statements here, but if you're interested in a more extended set of mission statements for various NGOs and governmental organizations, I've made a document available on my website. The best way to understand NGOs is to look at their mission statements. The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. NGOs raise money at the grassroots level, soliciting funds from individuals and corporations. With the help of our many partners, from individuals and governments to local nonprofits and corporations. Interestingly, the Nature Conservancy purchases land as the mechanism by which ecosystems and the species within would gain protection. Here is a screenshot of an article about the acquisition of land by the Nature Conservancy. As a possible contributor to the efforts of NGOs, you need to look carefully at how the NGOs spends its monies. If you like the idea of protection by purchase, you would choose the Nature Conservancy. Here's another example of how the Nature Conservancy protects ecosystems by buying them. The Nature Conservancy has approximately 15 million acres in the United States in the form of land trusts, conservation easements, and private reserves. The mission of Greenpeace is, Greenpeace exists because this fragile earth deserves a voice. It needs solutions. It needs change. It needs action. You can hear the activist voice in the Greenpeace mission, and activism characterizes Greenpeace efforts. To maintain its independence, Greenpeace does not accept donations from governments or corporations, but relies on the contributions from individual supporters and foundation grants. As you can see in this image, Greenpeace takes an activist approach toward environmental protection, and they raise money from individuals, not corporations, because they want to remain ideologically unbiased. Greenpeace volunteers can run afoul of the law in situations where they have become confrontational in an effort to protect the environment. In this case, Greenpeace activists slipped behind security lines at the headquarters of Procter & Gamble, a cosmetics company, to unfurl a banner protesting the use of palm oil from Indonesia. Palm oil production is linked to deforestation in tropical forests. Greenpeace activists get into remote and difficult locations in order to raise awareness in a sometimes shocking manner. In this photo, Greenpeace has decided to link Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, to deforestation and the loss of tigers. The mission of the Natural Resources Defense Council is to safeguard the earth, its people, its plants and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. NRDC works to restore the integrity of the elements that sustain life, air, land, and water, and to defend endangered natural places. The key term here is defend. NRDC has a staff of lawyers who use existing law to defend and protect ecosystems. In 2014, NRDC filed a suit in federal court to protect whales from military sonar. Now take note of how different NGOs approach environmental protection. Nature Conservancy purchases land, Greenpeace takes an activist approach, while the NRDC argues cases in courts of law. NGOs, as you can see in this image, are flexible and creative with the funds raised from individual donors. NGOs respond quickly to developing environmental issues. NGOs use media and social media to effectively heighten awareness of environmental issues. But ultimately, NGOs do not write or enforce law. That's the role of governments. The World Wildlife Fund mission is to conserve nature and reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. Our vision is to build a future in which people live in harmony with nature. WWF uses iconic imagery to educate and raise awareness. Often, in conjunction with governments, WWF funds projects aimed at the protection of ecosystems or certain species within ecosystems. The advertising wing of WWF is quite strong in raising awareness, sometimes for species and sometimes for humans caught in the crossfire of resource exploitation. We seek to save a planet, a world of life, reconciling the needs of human beings and the needs of others that share the earth. You can hear the ecocentric perspective in WWF literature. We seek to instill in people everywhere a discriminating yet unabashed reverence for nature, and to balance that reverence with a profound belief in human possibilities. By 2020, WWF will conserve many of the world's most ecologically important regions by working in partnership with others to protect and restore species and their habitats, and to ensure that the value of nature is reflected in decisions made by individuals, communities, governments, and businesses, and to strengthen local communities' ability to conserve the natural resources that they depend upon, and to transform markets and policies to reduce the impact of the production and consumption of commodities. You can see the breadth of projects in which the WWF engages. And remember, NGOs are flexible and creative with funds raised from individual donors. NGOs respond quickly to developing environmental issues. NGOs use media and social media effectively to heighten awareness of environmental issues. Now, the Sierra Club mission is quite ecocentric: to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth, to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environment, and to use all lawful means to carry out these objectives. The Rainforest Action Network focuses specifically on environmental issues in tropical forests. Deforestation linked to palm oil plantations is one of their biggest issues at the moment. Notice how NGOs use social media to spread the word of their activities. Once again, deforestation linked to palm oil plantations is a principal focus of the Rainforest Action Network. The use of social media is an important approach toward raising monies and spreading awareness. Here is a table that characterizes the activities of NGOs with respect to their types of action, financial resources, use of media, diplomatic constraints, speed of response to environmental issues, and political influence. Spend some time with this table. Let's now shift our focus to intergovernmental and governmental organizations in conservation. Intergovernmental examples include IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, UNEP, which is the United Nations Environment Program. Governmental examples include the EPA and the management of national parks that protect species and ecosystems. The IUCN, established in 1948, is a large, important intergovernmental organization with many component parts. IUCN is an organization made up of governmental, non-governmental groups, a democratic membership union composed of over 1,200 members, 11,000 scientific experts, and 1,000 staff who work together in more than 160 countries. The most important NGO affiliated with the IUCN is WWF, which originated as part of the IUCN in 1961. The IUCN is responsible for the development and ongoing maintenance of the Red List that identifies species threatened with extinction. The red list is a dynamic list of species categorized by their risk of extinction. Species status is in continuous flux, depending on the success of conservation efforts or the lack thereof. The IUCN also works to raise awareness, sometimes in dramatic fashion. UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, was established in 1972, and it's the designated program addressing environmental issues at the global and regional level for the United Nations. As an intergovernmental organization, the mission is vast, assessing global, regional, national environmental conditions and trends, developing international agreements and national environmental instruments, strengthening institutions for wise environmental management, integrating economic development and environmental protection, and facilitating the transfer of knowledge and technology for sustainable development. Examples of international agreements related to biological diversity include the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1988, Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, 1973, Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species, 1979, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture in 2006, Convention on Wetlands, Ramsar, 1971, World Heritage Convention, 1972, and International Plant Protection Convention, dating all the way back to 1951. Agreements on food and plant species diversity include the Convention on the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture from 2006, as well as the International Plant Protection Convention from 1951. As well, the Convention on Biological Diversity of 1988 advocates for the conservation of genes, species, and ecosystems. There is a Convention on Wetlands known as Ramsar, 1971. There is a Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species from 1979. And there's the World Heritage Convention of 1972. All of these are under the auspices of UNEP. The Convention for the International Trade of Endangered Species of 1973, aka CITES, is one of the most successful international agreements that serves in the protection of species. This is a species approach toward conservation. CITES is signed by 175 countries, lists 900 species that cannot be traded, and restricts the trade of 5,000 animals and 28,000 plant species. Within CITES, there are various levels of protection. There's Appendix 1, which is a complete ban on the trade of species, and there's Appendix 2, which limits trade so the species is sustainably harvested. If you keep your eyes open at airports, you will often see evidence of CITES. I took this photo at the Port Blair Airport in 2014. Port Blair is the capital of the Andaman Nicobar Islands under the political territory of India. I took these photos of snow leopard pelts in a market in Kashgar, China, a city at the base of the Tibetan Plateau and home of the snow leopard. People must decide not to buy these products because when we do, the market for pelts is stimulated, driving species toward extinction. CITES bans the international trade of tortoise shell products. Be careful when traveling in tropical countries not to purchase tortoise shell products. If you buy products made of threatened species, you encourage the market that further drives these species toward extinction. Be aware of the decisions you make. The trade of ivory is banned by CITES. In 1980, the United Nations Environment Program proposed the World Conservation Strategy, and the fundamental objectives are to maintain essential ecological processes and life support systems, to preserve genetic diversity, and to ensure sustainable use of species and ecosystems. Here are other UNEP conventions that protect ecosystems. I'll let you study this slide on your own. Now let's look at strictly governmental programs that conserve ecosystems and the species within the ecosystems. The Costa Rican government has designated 25% of its land area as nature reserves or national parks. This is the largest proportion of land area set aside for protection of any country in the world. The U.S. has more than 400 wildlife refuges, but the quantity of land area as a percentage of the whole in the U.S. is not very high. Establishing national parks can be viewed as ecocentric or anthropocentric. The parks of Costa Rica protect 500,000 plant and animal species. That's ecocentric. But the parks draw tourists who spend $1 billion per year. That's anthropocentric. The U.S. protects only 4.6% of its total land area, and 3/4 of that is in Alaska. Only 1.8% of the land area in the lower 48 states seen here is protected. And many of the parks in the U.S. are not very large. Only 4 of 413 wilderness areas in the lower 48 are larger than 4,000 square kilometers, thought to be the minimum size necessary to do a good job of protecting species. The National Park Service in the United States, established in 1916, preserves natural and cultural resources for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. You can hear the anthropocentric approach in the National Park Service mission. National parks of the U.S. are seen here in red. There are 401 national parks with 84 million acres of land. There are 11.7 billion visitors to the U.S. national parks per year, and it has a budget of $2.75 billion. Now, the Endangered Species Act of 1973 derives from U.S. government action, and it has listed 1,300 species, forbids federal agencies to carry out, fund, or authorize projects that would jeopardize an endangered species or its habitat. And it enforces the act with $100,000 fines and 1-year jail terms for offenses on private land. 80% of the listed species live totally or partially on private land. The Environmental Protection Agency is a governmental program with the vision stated as people in every small community in America will have clean air, drinking water, waste disposal, and related services that safeguard their health in a friendly and sustainable environment. The EPA is particularly involved in the cleanup of toxic spills or the cleanup of hazardous wastes. The Kenyan Wildlife Service is a government program that conserves and manages Kenya's wildlife for the Kenyan people and the world. It is a state corporation established by an act of parliament with the mandate to conserve and manage wildlife in Kenya and to enforce related laws and regulations. Read this statement by the Kenyan Wildlife Service. The challenges facing wildlife and biodiversity conservation in Kenya include climate change, habitat degradation and loss, forest depletion, tourism market volatility, human-wildlife conflict brought on by population growth, and changing land use habits of communities that coexist with wildlife, as well as wildlife crime. The Kenyan Wildlife Service acknowledges all of the challenges that they face. The Kenyan Wildlife Service undertakes conservation and management of wildlife resources outside protected areas in collaboration with stakeholders. The Community Wildlife Program of the Kenyan Wildlife Service, in collaboration with others, encourages biodiversity conservation by communities living on land essential to wildlife, such as wildlife corridors and dispersal lands outside parks and reserves. The premise is that if people benefit from wildlife and other natural resources, then they will take care of these resources. As you can see in this statement, the participation of local communities in conservation efforts is critical to conservation success. The Kenyan Wildlife Service knows this only too well. The importance of local communities in conservation is clear in this Kenyan Wildlife Service statement. The premise is that if people benefit from wildlife and other natural resources, they will take care of these resources. Here is the first slide of a table that compares the characteristics of governmental, intergovernmental organizations with NGOs. It focuses on types of action, financial resources, and use of media. I'd like you to study this slide on your own. Here is the second half of the table comparing the characteristics of governmental, intergovernmental organizations with NGOs. Take time to study these two slides. This slide looks at diplomatic constraints, speed of response, and political influence. I've come back to the outline for the 10 movies available for the Biodiversity Conservation Unit. We've just completed this part of the series, and up next is an analysis of the habitat and species-based approaches toward conservation. You've heard a little bit of this in this movie. National parks would be habitat approaches toward conservation, whereas CITES is a species-based approach toward conservation. And that brings us to the end of IBESS, Biodiversity Conservation, Part 8.